Welcome to World History Notes, where I read from the book wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. You can find it on lulu.com, amazon.com, or the Bible Baptist Bookstore. And you may not agree with the conclusions that I draw about world history, but you should know about these subjects, topics, people, places, events, and concepts, and more to be conversant in world history. So, let's begin. I'm going to talk about we're going to go back to Europe, but to the end of the 6th century, my focal point here. There was a figure at that time who arose to a position of power and prominence, who stands as a giant among his kind. Gregory was the first pope with real power, independent of the emperor and holding court over a spiritual empire in the vanquished political empire of Rome in the West. He molded the papacy into an independent temporal power capable of making treaties, setting political policy, and eventually making war. He had great conflicts with the emperor in Constantinople, trying to keep Italy from falling to the Lombards, and in doing so established his power. He was truly a secular leader, ruling a spiritual kingdom, ruling a secular kingdom. If this is confusing to you, it was particularly confusing to the Emperor Maurice back in Constantinople. One of his most important moves with regard to the Christian religion was his shock and horror at the success of Celtic Christianity, the kind that Patrick taught. The fact that they, men such as Columba, sent missionaries to Europe itself and were even found among the Anabaptists, Waldensian, Vaudois groups of northern Italy and southern France, he perceived as a threat to his own authority as the head of all Christians. So he sent a man named Augustine, not our scholar from earlier, but the head of a monastery, a place wholly devoted to studying religion in an environment separate from the world, to, quote, convert these heathen Christians to, quote, true Christianity. In other words, approved by Rome. By blackmail and threatening a foreign invasion, added to bogus miracles, the papacy was able to have Celtic Christianity outlawed at the Synod of Whitby later in 664. If the Emperor Justinian stood with one foot in the ancient world and one in the modern, Pope Gregory I stood squarely in the front door of the Dark Ages. His legacy hovered over mainstream European Christianity like a giant, in spite of the apostolic Christians still baptizing adult believers only, using the Old Latin Bible, believing in salvation by faith alone, and then the authority of the scriptures over any human being in power, living in remote mountain villages and on the edge of the former political empire of Rome in the West. A darkness has descended over Europe now, a spiritual darkness that will last for almost 1,000 years. It is so dark that in some places, at certain times, it will even be punishable by death to actually own a Bible of any kind and to have a Bible translated into the common vernacular or in any language other than Latin. Specifically, Jerome's Vulgate was a crime, most certainly punishable by death. There will be times that reading the Bible, even if you have the approved one, will be a crime, but not everywhere and not at all times. The medieval world, in spite of what you may have heard, was rich in Bibles and Bible manuscripts. It was an obsession, but I'm going to save that for later. For now, here's a timeline for our world from Augustine's birth in 354 until the death of Pope Gregory in 604. 350 to 376 sees the rise of the Ostrogothic kingdom of Ermanaric, who unites Ostrogoths and Visigoths in a vast empire from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea, comprising all the modern Ukraine, Poland, Russia, Lithuania, Slovakia, and Romania. 351 to 355 marks great internal and frontier disorders with Germanic barbarians making serious inroads into Gaul as a result of a civil war between Constantine's heirs and rebellious generals, leading uprising after uprising. In 355, Julian becomes emperor in the West and defeats his nemesis, the Alemanni tribe, at the Battle of Argentorate in 357. He also fights the tribe known as the Franks. 358 to 363, Constantius, emperor in the West, fights with Persia. 360 to 361, civil war between East and Western emperors for control. Upon hearing of Constantius' death en route to oppose him, Julian renounces Christ and becomes known as Julian the Apostate for returning to paganism, ruling both East and West. 363, Julian invades Persia, dying in battle. 364 to 378, Valentinian and Valens rule in West and East. 367 to 369, the Gothic War with Valens. 368 to 369, chaos in Britain with Saxon pirates and Scottish and Pict uprisings. 371 to 372, part of North Africa rebels. 372 to 374, the Huns or Sung Nu appear after 200 years of moving west when beaten by the Chinese. 376, Huns invade the Gothic Empire, and the panic-stricken Gothic refugees appear at the Danube, begging for entry into Rome. 377, war with Gothic refugees, chaos, barbarian attacks, and civil wars plague Rome year after year through the next century until the West collapses as a political unit in 476, the traditional date of what people say is the fall of the Western Roman Empire. 407 to 600 marks the rise of the Burgundians, Vandals, Bulgars, Slavs, Avars, and the Franks, with the Lombards finally invading Italy and becoming the ancestors of the modern Italians. 474 to 600, the Eastern Roman Empire is on the defensive. Justinian, its greatest emperor, is on the offensive, however, retaking Italy only to lose it to the Lombards and retaking some of the empire's possessions in North Africa under the great general Belisarius. He fought great wars with Persia as well. The importance of this timeline is that it shows the Roman Empire in the West was collapsing and being changed into the Europe that we have come to know in the Dark Ages, with 30 bishops of Rome, now called popes, giving a sense of regularity and sameness of authority to a chaotic situation made all the more disastrous by a world reeling from climatic change and widespread epidemics. The next time I talk, the next chapter I get into will be a more thorough study of the Americas up until the arrival of the Europeans to stay. It'll cover the time of the medieval period in Europe, or the Dark Ages, which are sometimes, I think, mistakenly divided between Dark Ages and Middle Ages. They weren't really dark and not really middle, but that's okay. That's what we call them, just like we call the American Civil War, which wasn't a civil war. It was between two geographical areas for control of the country and for the Union, and not a civil war like the American Revolution was, where neighbor fought neighbor. But anyway, that's another story. We now turn to the Americas after the fall of the old order in the great catastrophes of the 6th century, up until the time of the invasion by the Europeans. After that, it's on to medieval Europe until the Reformation. So I thank you, and I look forward to talking to you next time, and have a great day.